Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Nikita Udwani. Welcome to Fleet Forum's webinar on Without Stakeholders, No Success. I see we already have 20 people in. Fantastic. Before we start, can we please just do a quick audio video check? Are you able to hear and see me? I see Timothy's typing. I'm guessing it's a yes. Then. Yay, there we go. Thanks, Simon. So, welcome everyone. If this is your first Forum webinar, maybe just a few housekeeping rules. Uh, exactly. Please follow Timothy. Step one. We want to try to make this webinar as interactive as possible for you. I can't see you. It's really helpful to know who's in, where are you, especially also for our newer ones. Some of you I recognized from before, like Simon and Timothy. But for other colleagues, if you could just briefly introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, the organization, and which country you are listening in from today, that would be really helpful. Like I mentioned before, if it's the first time we are seeing each other, then nice to meet you. My name is Nikita Udwani. I'm the delivery director at Fleet Forum, and today I'm going to be talking to you about stakeholder engagement. This webinar is not a new topic, as this is a very important skill that a fleet manager must have in order to be successful, and we'll be discussing that in more depth today. We have facilitated this webinar in 2021, and we've included a few new messages around it as well. So of course, as I was mentioning earlier, we try to make it as interactive as possible. So I've also included some questions where I would like to get your thoughts and your ideas on this topic as well. I've prepared some slides. It will take me roughly 15-20 minutes out of the 30 minutes. And then we've also planned time to take your questions. So please feel free to use the chat box throughout the webinar to raise questions, to comments, to share your ideas. So let's begin. So, without stakeholders, no success. Why are we talking about this, right? So, maybe just to put this idea a little bit in context, if you've attended one of our fleet management trainings before, you probably recall, and if you haven't, then I'll explain to you briefly. But we talk about the cycle of continuous improvement: plan, do, check, adjust. And what we mean by this is that many times, as fleet managers, or I think our colleagues might have the impression that this is the fleet manager, he or she is dispatching the vehicles, moving it from one point to the other. And that's true, that's part of our day to day. But fleet management is much more than that, right? And it's about having the thinking of how am I going to continuously improve the approaches when it comes to the organization's the assets that it owns or that it's operating, for example, as rental vehicles. But ultimately, you are trying to make sure that you continuously improve, you make the fleet sustainable, safe, available for programmatic activities and used well, and also cost efficient, right? And that means you are constantly implementing new projects, new initiatives. If you attended our conference a few weeks ago, you'll know we talked about vehicle sharing, we talked about how to set up a program to monitor driver performance, to make it more safe and sustainable. We talked about electric vehicles. So there's a number of, these are examples of initiatives or projects that you might run as a fleet manager, right? And if we think about it, many of the projects, yes, fleet, it's about the vehicles, but I think it's much more, right? What I mean with this is that we can implement two projects might have a very how do I say, they might have a very similar nature, and even we might have a very good plan. How are we going to start? Where are we going to continue? We might even have like excellent technical components, the budget, and still it might not go well, right? And what we see from research is that one of the biggest factors that contributes to whether a project goes well, a change project goes well or not, is how, to what extent have we considered people's opinion in this, that we have managed them, that we have made them feel part of this change process. And so this is why today we're very much talking about stakeholder engagement. I see Kennedy has joined us as well. He's also done a session about this topic previously. So as a fleet manager, you need technical skills, no doubt, right? So, but you also need people skills in terms of how you communicate, how you interact with people, how you engage your stakeholders. So that's the topic of today's webinar. And I'm going to be giving you some tips and pointers on what to consider when you are implementing a new initiative in your operation. Yeah. So let's look into this in more depth. What is like, this is why I've just explained why we look at this topic, but what is stakeholder engagement? So on my slide, you will see a very precise and crisp definition. It says it is the systematic identification, analysis, planning, and implementation of actions designed to influence stakeholders. And you will see also our recommendations today are very much structured around how do you identify, how do you analyze their position, and what actions are you planning then to influence them and make them feel part of this process. Because ultimately we must understand their perspectives, balance that with the business needs or like the needs of our project, because if we don't get their buy-in, then it's very likely that our project will not move forward, right? They'll tell us, yes, yes, it's very important, but then they will not prioritize it. They will not take it seriously. You really want to get their commitment where they feel, yes, this project is going to help me as well and my priorities. So this is why this is what stakeholder engagement is, right? Now let's imagine, right? I want to make it very practical for us today. And a big topic that we discussed at the conference is vehicle sharing, right? So let's take an example. Imagine you want to introduce vehicle sharing. Who do you think are the key stakeholders um, to engage in this process? Can I ask you to use the chat box to share? Whether if you are already doing vehicle sharing, great, then you can share from historical experience. If you are currently not engaged in a vehicle sharing project, I still want to encourage you to think along and think out loud with me, okay, who are these stakeholders that I would need to engage? So Simon says drivers. Drivers is a group that we need to encourage, when we need to take into consideration with vehicle pooling. I said sharing, my apologies. Pooling, who else? Drivers will be affected, definitely, but who else will be affected? And who else will be impacted by a vehicle pooling project? Who can make or break our project? Users, project staff. Thank you, Kennedy. Yes. Abojo, you said exactly. Oh, yes. 3 out of 3. Okay, yes, I see some more people thinking about this. Who else? Do we have any other ideas on who might impact this project? Senior management, okay, yes. Imagine they are saying, yes, set up the pool, but please don't involve me. Then what message will it send to the staff as well on whether they believe in this or not, right? So, indeed, is there any other stakeholder group? Maybe I suggest one. Finance, could that be one as well? Like if we're going to pool the vehicles today, right? We also will probably need to think about how are we going to allocate the costs to the respective programs that we are considering. So we need to have some good communication with them on how. I think sometimes when I talk to finance colleagues about pooling, they think, yeah, but it's easier when every project has its own vehicles, then we can just trace the cost back to them. But easiest is also not per se good for the environment, nor is it cost efficient, right? So pooling is a tried and tested approach, but of course it requires you to have a good alignment with your finance colleagues on what data are we going to capture in a way that also allows us to allocate costs in a transparent and fair way to the respective projects, right? So that's one we need to take into consideration. So let me see. I see a few more of you are saying, of course, the fleet manager yourself. Maybe also you in the field if you have like fleet officers. So indeed, when you are doing a project, right? Think about a project that you might be implementing through our trainings, or just if you are not in our trainings and you have some initiatives going on. The first step one you need to do is on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard, list out who are going to be these who is going to be affected by this, right? Step one, make the list of people exactly like we have done right now. Yeah. And then step two, the next thing we want to do then is to prioritize them. And you can, I'm not sure if you've seen this matrix before. I think it's quite a common matrix. It's not specific to fleet management, but I'll walk you through it briefly to help you understand how it works. So once you have the list of people, right, some of these people might have the power to block your project, right, or to advance it. So what you're seeing on this 2 by 2 matrix is on one axis we are looking at how powerful is this stakeholder, how much power do they have to support or block my project. So if they say no, will the whole project come to a stop? Yes or no? That's one thing to think about. And the other part is interest. And that has to do with, do they care about my project, or do they say this is not really my thing, I don't really, it's not really so important for me, right? So on that basis you can map out your stakeholders, and then you can classify them into one of these four groups. And then that also helps you it gives you some ideas on what strategies you can take. So for example, if today the stakeholder group you have identified is very powerful and also very interested, then what you want to do is fully engage these people in your project. Make them really feel, that they feel, yes, this is going well, I'm happy, I'm informed, my needs have been taken into consideration. That's the manage closely. If you have people who are very powerful but they are not so interested in this project, then what you need to do is, you don't have to put maximum effort in bringing them into every meeting and giving them every update, because after a while they might think like you are badgering me, you're stalking me, why are you giving me so much information? So keep them, you put enough some work to keep them satisfied, but not giving them the constant updates, right? Pick and choose which moments are important to give them updates that they will think, ah yes, okay, this is going on. Then that's the keep satisfied group. Now let's think about people who have no power but they are very interested in this project. So those people, what we've got to do is keep them informed. So talk to them to ensure that no major issues arrive. They can be very helpful actually, because they have an interest in the project. So sometimes maybe a perspective that you are not considering, they might be able to bring to your attention. So you want to keep them informed, right? But also remember, they are not the most, they don't have a lot of power, so they won't block your project, but they can be a good sounding board for you. And then lastly, you have the batch of people, the group of people who have low power, low interest. So there, monitor these people, but don't bore them with excessive details of the project. So my question to you actually in the chat box is, have you used this before in your projects? I'm curious. Have you used this 2 by 2 grid? A yes or a no would really help me already. Then I can take a little bit of the temperature of the room. Where are we? My question, just to repeat in case you didn't hear me, is, have you used a stakeholder engagement grid like the one that I'm mentioning right now? I see some of you typing. No. Okay. Then I already see we are bringing upon some new ideas today. Colleague, this is not a very complicated thing. It can be a simple paper-based exercise or on your laptop, whatever is easiest, just to start thinking. I see some of you are saying yes. Great. Those of you who said yes, please feel free to use the chat box also to share how did it help you. Like, I mean, I've done this before, but we of course want to hear from colleagues also who say, yes, I have taken this is what it gave me, this is where it was helpful, or here's where I struggled a little bit. So any of you who said yes, and if you feel comfortable to share, that would also be really helpful. Thank you. Oh, Sheila, there we go. Yes, including stakeholder engage, external stakeholders, right? Like the government. Exactly. This is really, like sometimes we have a great project, but like I said, when we don't consider the people, then we tend it can really mess up our project. Kenneth, you say yes as well. Great, super. I'm happy to hear that. So this is step two, prioritizing them, right? So what you can do also is then after you've talked to your stakeholders, ask them questions, because how what I want to emphasize here is that I told you to prioritize them, right? But how are you going to prioritize them? You can only do that by discovering how they feel about your project, right? So you know the part about how powerful they are, how interested they are, but then you also want to find out how it's like what are they thinking about your project? Are they thinking, "Whoa, this is great," or are they thinking, "Oh, no, 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 I don't like how this project is going"? So here, what you do is first step you place them in the matrix. Second step after that, then or third step, sorry, you color code them, meaning you'd have discussions with them, you discover how they are thinking and feeling about your project, and then you put them in a color: green, happy, great; red, not happy, not a good sign. And like that, then you can think about, okay, who are the people then? How am I going to convince them? So, and we'll come to the convincing part, right? Just some questions that can also help you understand your stakeholders, just to give you some ideas, right? When I'm doing this exercise and I'm thinking about them, I'm trying to understand what financial or emotional interest do they have in my project. So, for example, maybe with pooling, right? We might have some drivers who think, now maybe I will not get assigned to this. Maybe I will work with staff or have to move staff who I don't really like. So they might be worried. They might have an emotional interest of, I don't know if I like this, you know? Or maybe today, if you are paying a lot of overtime and you are moving to a pooling approach to be more efficient, to that you might also have drivers who might think, I don't know. I don't like this. This might have an impact on my money. Or it doesn't have to always be negative. Right? It can also be positive. Maybe some drivers will think, wow, now we get to be part of the team. We are rotating the vehicles. I get to connect with more staff in the organization. I get to go to different locations. So it can vary, yeah, but the point is to take into consideration what financial or emotional interest might they have in the project, what is motivating them, what information do they want, and what is the best way to communicate with them, who influences their opinion, right? So today you don't always have to be the one to pass the message either. You can also think, who are the people that influence my stakeholders, and how can I influence them, and then they will influence my stakeholders. So think about it like that. Also, think about, if they aren't positive, what can I say or give them that will also help them get interested in the project? So these are the types of questions you want to ask yourself in this process of color coding them. Yeah. So let's go back to the vehicle pooling example, right? Um, and I see, Abdurrahman, you say you have to do the analysis before you do anything and compare the benefits of the project to the society and the organization, right? Indeed. So let's take a look at vehicle pooling, right? You might have your drivers, this is just an example, but that you imagine you have these conversations and then you get different perspectives. You might get the dispatcher or the head driver who's saying, oh wow, great, I will get a chance to develop my coordination skills. But maybe he or she is also thinking, what will this mean, a reduction in trips for the drivers? Because they are having that first line of contact with the drivers, right? So they're probably also thinking, is this going to mean something negative for them? How will I manage it? The finance manager might think, okay, this sounds like we will save money. I like this idea, but poof, now we have to split all these costs. Is this going to mean my team needs to take more time to work on this? How are we going to manage this? And they might be a bit more unconvinced till it's clear what will the workload implications mean for them, right? The program manager, the team lead might say, okay, in theory, this seems like a great idea, Nikita, but in practice, my flexibility is being affected. So when I'm working with partners who are always planning meetings on the day off and they're calling and saying, can you be here today? How will my needs be accommodated? And then you might have a country director who says, okay, you've told me it's good for for our bottom line, it's good for our money, it's good for our sustainability, it will not have a negative impact on our ability to deliver, but what do you need from me? You know, you got to do the work. Do you need something from me, or is that's it, you know? So this is an example of like when you talk to your stakeholders, what types of impressions you might get from them. So you need to think about this in your project as well, right? And once you've talked to them, this fourth step that you've got to do then is to come up with the communication activities. So per stakeholder group, you're going to write down, okay, who is that group? What is my objective with that group? What type of messages am I going to pass to them? How am I going to deliver these messages? Am I doing a presentation with them? Am I updating something on the internet? Am I doing this through WhatsApp? And by when am I doing this? With what frequency am I doing this? Am I doing this once a month? Once every 3 days? Once every 6 months? How frequently am I then providing, how am I communicating with this group? So it's just to recap so far, it's identifying the stakeholders, prioritizing them, taking the temperature of how supportive or not supportive they are, and then coming up with the actions that you are and the communication activities more specifically that you are going to be implementing. And don't forget, think about, this is a final tip before we go into the Q&A. I'm going to, if you haven't raised any questions as yet, now is your chance to raise some questions. Please use the Q&A mode. Think of if there's any challenge you're experiencing in your stakeholder engagement skills and you want some advice from me or from other colleagues also on the line today. We have about 35 of us today. Please use the chat box. But in the meantime, I'm going to share with you a final little tip. I would really encourage you to think, who is the preferred sender of this message? What I mean with this is that I don't want you to walk away thinking, now I, as the fleet manager who's overseeing this project, I have to do all the communication myself, right? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that as the fleet manager who's running this project, you should lead this exercise of identifying your stakeholders, but you should think about who is the preferred sender of these messages. So what you're seeing on my screen actually is it's a change management research that is done, and it looks at who, according to different roles in the organization, who is the preferred sender of the message. And what we see here is that what the business message, meaning why is vehicle pooling good for the organization, people think these business messages should come from a senior manager, the CEO in this case they're mentioning. But basically think about it in humanitarian terms, in our terms, it's the senior manager, right? That should be giving this message. But what the personal message, meaning what does it mean for me as finance? What does it mean for me as a driver? What does it mean for me as a transport user? That really must come from the supervisor of the person. So think about this when you are making your communication plan. Again, I want to repeat, it's not, you don't have to be the one who's doing all the communication. It's think about who is it best that this message comes from, and then work together to get those messages to the people, to get their support to distribute, to share the messages. That's what should be your goal. Yeah? Alrighty, we have 7 minutes more. Let me go over to the Q&A. Let me see, colleagues, have you raised any questions? I don't see any questions as yet. Let me give you a minute more. We're very quiet today. There we go. I'm seeing one question pop up. Yes. So here we have a question that says, I'm not sure my manager, there we go. I'm not sure my manager has time to support me with this project. How can I get their engagement? There we go. So thank you. It's a good question. So I think that one of the things I reference our training activities, right? Because in our fleet management fundamentals, we put a lot of focus on what projects and initiatives you're going to implement to make yourself, like to make your project a success. And what we see many times is that as a fleet manager, maybe I have certain projects that I think Whoa, these are very important. But my manager actually is not convinced of this. They're not telling me no, but they're also not actively supporting. So here I think if you have a situation where you're thinking, my manager is not really, I've asked them to please communicate the messages, I've given them tasks, and they're not implementing it. I think it's not, think of, maybe you have to go one step back and think, is this, do I have the support to run this project? And if I don't, then either I need to then maybe before continuing with the project, I need to take one step back and think, how can I get that support? What arguments can I bring to them that would convince them? And even then, if you think, if they're saying, no, I understand the arguments, but this is not a priority because I need to focus more on this topic or that topic, then I would really encourage you also to think at the start of the project, does it, or even does it make sense to continue this? What will be the added value of this? And we try to encourage, I link it to our trainings because whenever fleet managers are identifying initiatives in their action plan, we are constantly encouraging them and challenging them to think and challenging you to think what initiatives will support my will have the support of my manager and their peers or their manager, because when you pick things that are important for you but also for the organization, then you are much more likely to have success in taking this forward. If you are working on something that only you think is important but it requires the involvement of others, the chances of that project succeeding, very low, very low. Let me see, we've got another question in the meantime. Let me just pop it onto the screen. Thank you, Sheila. You said on the last slide, how do we arrive at the percentages displayed? A good question. So I've taken this. I'm happy to include the source of this thing as well afterwards. I've taken this question from I did put the source. There we go. 2018 ProSci. So ProSci is like a change management certification. It's actually quite helpful for, especially those of you on the line today who are, you see, you're fleet managers. You also want to look at more how can you expand your soft skills. Taking a certification course on change management, how to implement projects considering the change, the people in engagement. And here, what ProSci is the company that. I actually took my certification from, and I use them sometimes for my research. And they have every year they are publishing a book and it's the most up-to-date industry research. They're looking at the commercial sector, the governmental sector, a wide range of stakeholders that they engage in their surveys and interviews. And here what you're seeing is from the sample that they surveyed, this is what they noticed. Yeah, I hope that clarifies it. Let me see. Joseph, you said, will you send it to us in French? Joseph, I'm afraid at the moment right now we are mostly doing the webinars in English. However, what we are trying to do is see which webinars are most relevant, most popular, most also linked to the activities and the capacity building activities that we have in Fleet Forum. And my colleague is actually engaged in the moment at expanding the knowledge platform, which will include some of the recordings from our webinars. Yes. Let me see. Kathy, you say change is always resisted, even if it will produce positive results in the long run. What are some of the strategies we can use to ensure stakeholder buy-in? Yeah, thank you, Kennedy. I appreciate your question. So I think here what I would recommend that you say, like you said, for me the keywords here, right, is I think that change is always resisted. To be honest, I agree with you. I think it's part of human dynamics. So I think that one thing we should already put in our mind is when we are launching something, even when we start with like all different types of communication activities, you will still get some resistance. And it should not, don't take it as a sign, as a complete failure of your communication activities either. The important thing is plan the activities so you can already avoid as much resistance as possible through good communication, but then still expect that for some people maybe they will need more time to get their head around this. So that's one thing. Manage your own expectations of the process, communicate, but also expect that there will be some resistance, and don't close your mind in the moment thinking, oh, but I told them and they're still not. No, we have to just think, how else can we approach this? What other way are we going to find? They're not convinced. It's normal. What are we going to do? That's one strategy I would recommend. And another quick one, looking at the time, is we always talk about quick wins or early successes. I mentioned that because you said even if it will produce results in the long run. I think that what's important to show when when you're starting this type of when you're starting a project that you know it's going to take a while to see the results is already structure your plan in terms of what early success will I be able to point out, and to start being very active around the communication of that early success. So already you start to convince some people, this is a good idea, it's working. Because many times we talk in change management, we talk about the 10-80-10 principle, which is you have 10% of the people who are very active, 10% of the people who are very negative, and then 80% of the people who are waiting to watch which way is this going to go, good or a failure project. So using that early success communication strategy is to convince those 80% and get more people to sign up. So in your project plan, think about what action. Don't maybe try to tackle, imagine you're rolling out something in your country, maybe don't go to the biggest office or the office where you already know they have experienced lots of projects where it didn't work out. Start with somebody who you think, okay, this is going to work in an environment which is more stable. Implement it there first and then communicate about that to then get more people on board. Yeah. I hope this gave you some new ideas, Kennedy, and also other colleagues. Thank you for raising the question. I see we are 1 minute over. Let's wrap it up, colleagues. Thank you all for joining today, for listening, for being open and honest also about your reflections on the 2x2 matrix, and for raising the questions that you did. I really hope that I gave you a tool today that you can maybe use in the next week or two. Please don't wait for months and months to use it, colleagues. You will forget it by then already. So think about your any ongoing projects or initiatives you have and already try to practice. Use it a little bit. Then you start making it your own, and it becomes much more part of your own skill set as well. And if we've got the 2 webinars coming up this month already, and some more, but I focus on the next 2. One is around how to make an effective movement schedule, also linked somewhat to the pooling topic that we've been discussing today. And also those of you who, and I definitely see some repeat names, and I'm sure some of the newer colleagues as well. We have our Fleet Manager of the Year award every year. And my colleague in 2 weeks from now, Rose, is going to be doing a session on how can you write a winning application. So if you think you have been working on some interesting projects, come join that session. You'll learn how to prepare yourself for the award, how to write an application, how to submit it. So thank you all so much today. I appreciate your time, and I hope to see you next week. Have a great day. Bye-bye.